Now, let's move on. It's time for the controversy, where we take some of the big contentious issues of the day and discuss them right here. And today, the Scottish Government has said it intends to bring forward the Gender Recognition Reform for Scotland bill within the next year. This law would allow those under 18 to legally change their sex. While statistics released by the campaign group for Women Scotland showed there were 51 cases over 6 years where trans boys under the age of 18 had been approved for double mastectomies. So this is, of course, a real issue with very real and long-standing consequences for people experiencing it. And we can go to Stephanie Davies-Arai, Director of Transgender Trend and author of Communicating with Kids. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. As we say on the tin, it's the controversy, obviously a very controversial issue, and many people will be looking at this thinking it's absurd to let children be allowed to change their gender, particularly when it comes to going through the surgical process.
Yes, and let's be clear that when we're saying change their gender, we're teaching children that they can change their sex, they can change from girl to boy or boy to girl. And the Scottish Government would be reinforcing the message that children and adolescents are getting everywhere now, online, even now in schools, that it's possible to change sex, that if you are female, you are literally a boy if you feel like a boy, and that it's your inner feelings that determine whether you're a boy or a girl and not your biological sex. So the change in the Scottish Government's plan to lower the age where you can get a gender recognition certificate, what that actually means is that you can get your birth certificate changed if you're a boy to say that you were literally born female. So this it has huge implications. It adds to what children are learning. It reinforces the message from government, not just from trans lobby groups and not just from the internet, not just from Tumblr and YouTube videos, but from the government itself. Is saying, yes, if you're female, you can be literally a boy and you can have legal status as a boy.
Trans people are some of the most persecuted in the United Kingdom, and many have really quite torrid times navigating the complicated legal structures of how the system is set up as things stand. Does not simplifying things and allowing people to sort of streamline this process give them a better chance at a happier life?
What this proposed plan means is a system of self-ID for anyone. I don't see it as legislation for trans people. It's anybody can change their legal sex and basically choose their sex. And that has huge implications for the rights of other people, particularly women and girls, particularly gay and lesbian people. If we're saying that sex is meaningless and that our policy and legislation will be based on people's internal feelings rather than their biology. It's also an ideology that's being taught as truth to children, that it is our gender identity that makes us male or female and not our biological sex. So it's a huge discussion, and it doesn't mean that we cannot support transgender rights and support transgender people who should not face discrimination, clearly. But that does not mean that we have to teach a whole new ideology of gender, which, let's face it, is a belief, and people are entitled to hold that belief. But that belief should not be imposed on everybody else. The belief that biological sex is immutable is also a protected belief, and most people would agree with that. And we can have laws and policies that protect transgender people without denying reality.
What do you think there's enough accountability in cases where young people transition and then regret it and then want to detransition later on? Kira Bell is, of course, one of the most sort of popular cases in this instance. And just a few days ago, her ruling was the ruling in her case was overturned, which means that judge ruled that under 16s can indeed give informed consent to puberty blockers. But what does happen when things go wrong and people regret it? Is there any accountability at all for politicians, for the doctors making these decisions for young people?
Absolutely, there is accountability, and there needs to be a recognition that making such decisions at such a young age, in the adolescent years, which I'm sure we all remember how difficult those years can be, and how confusing, and how much you're searching for your identity. At that time of life, to make a decision that then will be legally validated, there is no built-in return to that decision legally. So detransitioners out, be young women and it's mostly young women who regret their transition. There is no legal way back. So a young woman such as Kira Bell, who wants to live as a woman, she has the irreversible physical changes to her body. So she will always have to shave. She will always have a deep voice. Those irreversible aspects of treatment will be lifelong. But also she has no way of changing her birth certificate back to say female. So she always has her proof of identity says that she is male. And there's nothing built into that system to, if you're going to say 16-year-olds can make this decision, they have to make it for life. That is too much to expect of an adolescent. But the Scottish Government are not only planning that, they're planning to have no need for a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. The waiting period is reduced from 2 years to 3 months. So these children who have been taught online that to understand themselves in terms of being transgender rather than being non-conforming or being gay or lesbian or having any exploration of issues that have led to that cross-sex identity are being affirmed in schools, affirmed in the gender clinics, put on this medical pathway, which is the only pathway they are offered. They're not offered a therapeutic pathway that explores any issues that may be behind the gender dysphoria. And all of these changes are irreversible, both physically, medically, and legally. So you're expecting a level of maturity and life experience that 16-year-olds just don't have.
Yeah, indeed. Well, Stephanie Davies-Arai, thank you so much for discussing what is obviously a very contentious issue there, Director of Transgender Trends.